everybody.
Hey, everyone.
I'm Josh.
I'm Emily, and this is this evening's episode of The Night Bite.
Yeah, Thursday,
yeah. Last week, we were here on a random Wednesday. We had talked to Cold Snap, and that was a whole lot of fun. There was a whole lot of questions, and we loved getting through all of those and, talking about the things that you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, Dan was a great guy, and he had a whole bunch of cool stuff that he was bringing out and that they have over there, so it's always fun to talk about the toothpicks, too.
Absolutely. And they come in so many colors these days. It's amazing how much people love that. So,
Hi, Bill.
I'm laughing at Bill because we told him we wouldn't invite him. But obviously, everybody is invited to this show. I'm inviting your comments or, let us know what events you have coming up. Ice Out is coming fast. So that might even start to be an open water event coming up here. But, those are all things that we look forward to.
Yeah, speaking of events, Battle on Bago went pretty well. Not as much fish as normally is caught, but there was quite a few. We were right by the booth, the weigh-in booth, so we got to see a bunch of big perch and some nice walleyes and a bunch of crazy carrying cases. It was pretty cool.
Saw somebody come in with a big giant soda cup filled with perch. So there was obviously no more soda in it anymore. But, when you have fish to come and weigh in and there is time limits, people will bring those fish in the ways that they can. So that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, without further ado, I guess we have a really exciting chat tonight.
Yeah, we do. So we'll bring him in. Hey, Scott.
Hey, guys. How are you?
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm from Western New York. Obviously, with the color of the beard, you can see I'm a seasoned ice fisherman. I actually started because one of my buddies that was in the neighborhood, like I grew up in a neighborhood in town, and this old guy used to pull up on Saturdays and honk, and I'd jump in the car and go. My dad, although he was an open water fisherman, just wasn't an ice water fisherman. So Jimmy would pull up and slow down a little bit. I'd jump in the car. We'd run down to Canisius Lake and catch those perch that you're talking about. Back then, there was monster perch back in there. So I started, like everybody probably as a kid, 12 or 14. And then I had some years I didn't ice fish an awful lot. And then I just kind of got back into it with the trap attacks and the old school trap attacks back in the day. And it just kind of blossomed into this thing where I really fell in love with learning about fish. All of the video that you see playing behind me, I married my high school sweetheart, still madly in love with her, and she didn't divorce me when I bought an underwater camera, so I figured it was probably true love at that point. And so we have two great kids. We have grandkids now. It's just a good life and a part of my life. I'm a school teacher. A youth pastor. My life is very complex, and I'm very blessed with a lot of different things. But one of the things that I have, which I think is why you want me on tonight, is I own Maki Plastic, which is a plastic company, and kind of our gig was back in the early days was just kind of innovating plastics from a simple whip into very complex shapes. And then again, as I fell in love with learning more and more and more about fish, I had to learn about what they ate and then the science behind the biology in the lake and everything else. And so it kind of turned into my passion, turned into this lifelong learning for me that now I try to share with others through the ICE team and through my social media outreach and then also live events. And same thing you guys do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and there is a whole range of things that I would love to talk to you about with all of that. So it's almost hard to choose a place to start. But I'm going to choose a place that actually you did not mention. So many people out there hear plastics and they shut down. So many people you talk to and they are excited as could be, and they are plastics people, but then there are live bait people. So, tell us a little bit about, it sounds silly, but why do people love live bait so much?
I think for aggressive fish and for eating fish, it just works better. I think the one advantage to live bait that it has is it puts a scent ball in the area of the fish. And so as fish are coming in to address it, when you see most of the video that's running back there, what will happen is their gills will flare a little bit. Well, really what they're doing is they're tasting the the kind of scent ball that's around whatever it is they're coming up to. And that's really an advantage, because then as fish are trying to figure out whether they're going to put it in their mouth or what this thing is, they go, okay, that's natural because it tastes natural right now in the water. And then they look at it for a little bit. So if it looks right and it kind of tastes right, then they're going to figure it out if it's really a meal that they want to eat. And the only way they can do that, they don't have hands like we are, can't reach out and grab it. They put it in their mouth. And how long they hold it in their mouth is when we're connected with them with a rod, and how long we have to set the hook or not set the hook. So I think with live people, with live bait people, they just have, it's a dimension that works very well in many days. Like if I look at myself personally, like if I'm out fishing, if the three of us were out fishing, I'm always going to have red spikes in my pocket. Now I own a bait manufacturing company, right? I can have any bait that I want. I'm always going to have red spikes, and I'm always going to have wax worms in my pocket if we're fishing a tournament, because if it's one of those days where they just do not want plastic, and that does happen, then I don't want to be outfished by anyone, because that's just who we are as fishermen, right? So in a big sense, I think a lot of times people, it's just what they're used to. And then the other piece that really kind of gets people stuck in that rut is if they see 3 or 4 fish come in and they don't go on that piece of plastic. Now they may not have went on a live bait either, but if they see them not go on that 3 or 4 fish that didn't go on that piece of plastic, they're going to go, okay, going right back to wax worms, and I'm going to go back down the hole again. And now, maybe they'll bite that day. The one thing that I always suggest for folks, if you're serious about learning plastic and gaining confidence in it and understanding the whole process and why it works better, you got to leave live bait home for a little while. So you got to drive away from the house, leave it there, not stop, and go fish it for a whole day and really give it a chance. If you look at the championships that are won every year, almost every competition, it's going to be won by plastics. And the reason is, and I'm not saying that to sell you my bait or anybody else's bait. The reason is it's just so much more functionally correct as far as what you can do with it. You're not at the mercy of the bait. You're really in control of the bait. So anything that you do with your rod tip, with a spring bobber, with how you're rigging it, you can be so much more creative about how that fish addresses and how you're addressing that fish by fishing plastic bait.
Well, and I'm going to expand a little bit on one of the things that you just kind of said. You're kind of at the mercy of the bait. I don't think that's exactly how you put it, but that's the thing is your waxies, are they frozen? Did you forget about them and they turned into little flies? Did it squish and fall apart and it's gone off your hook? Like a minnow, are they frozen? Are they alive? Did I hook it the right way? Does it have too much action, too little action? And I think that those are all puzzles that kind of get put together throughout the day and kind of the struggles of being a fisherman, you navigate that. But I mean, there's a lot of things like you're saying, plastics simply can hold up. If you're on biting fish, it's not change a minnow, change a minnow, change a minnow. You're able to sometimes go right back down that hole. And so I think that's a very interesting point. Plastics have limitations, but I think bait does as well.
I think, too, one of the interesting parts that you triggered in my brain when you were talking about that is with its minnow. Now think about it in terms of the fish. They've swam by everybody presenting a minnow. And we've all seen that some days they turn off of those. And sometimes you can go to half a minnow, rip it apart, a fish eye, whatever. You can go to some of those other natural things. But understand, as many times as these fish have seen the same thing down there over and over again, they swam by, you look at Bago, they swam by the same thing probably 30 times, and eventually they ate something, right? So I look at it like a trade show. So the three of us have been together at trade shows before, right? And let's say we're going to buy jigs. And so the very first booth that we look at every jig that's there. And the second booth, we look at another jig, almost every jig. By the fifth or sixth booth full of jigs, we're looking at maybe 1 or 2 and just walking away, right? Well, that's the same thing that happens with fish. They get conditioned over time to looking at the same old thing. Big fish, and this is where I go with the tournament wins, the heavy fish, they've seen everything that swims down there. And so when it's different enough that they can put it in their mouth, or they will put it in their mouth, to check it, and it smells right, and it tastes right, and it feels right in their mouth, and it's presented in the right way with the right cadence and the rod tip. All of those things come together, and that's why most of the bigger fish, in most cases, will come on a piece of plastic, because it's different. It's not the same thing they just swam by 100 times. Does that make sense to you guys?
Well,
Yeah, and I think it's a really great point, because when you talk to people about plastics, one of the things that they seem to think is that, you're trying to perfectly match the hatch. And although sometimes that can be very true, when the bait is plentiful and they are biting, you're on a school of crappies that are eating a school of little minnows, great, perfectly match that, but I think sometimes the point of the plastic is to be kind of the most attractive, that you kind of, like we're saying, you can control that size or that profile or that action. And that is sometimes the difference between catching a fish and not.
Mm-hmm. Fish sometimes are triggered too by their color. And I had a handful, I shared it, I don't know if you picked it up on last week, but I shared a handful of bait, and my camera didn't do a great job. I've got a good camera, but it didn't do a great job of all of the nuances inside of the colors of those baits. But from the end to the beginning of a tail, it went from a motor oil to a clear in the middle to a red on the tip. That's the other thing that you can do with plastics that you're just not going to do. A fathead always looks like a fathead does. A waxworm always looks like a waxworm is going to. The subtle nuances that you can play with a piece of plastic, even if it's the same color piece, but just grab a Sharpie, put a little bit of red tip on the end of it. If that's and last weekend, that is what it was. It was a bloodworm bite, and they were motor oil through the beginning, and almost to the end it went clear, and then it went red tip on the end of it. Now, I don't know what kind of flies those were, and I don't know at what pattern in the life cycle it was, and I don't know how far digested it was in the fish's belly, because all of those things play into color. But when you look at color variations, and all of the color variations that many of the bait companies have, it's because almost every aquatic insect's exoskeleton is or their bodies are clear. So whatever they're eating, their food source, so that biomass, whatever it is that those small aquatic insects themselves are eating, that's the color that they turn. The more, again, that you can key into those small individual pieces, that's why guys who are better than me fishing in a tournament are going to beat me just about every time, because they've seen that. They put the time in the week before. They know exactly what those fish are eating. They've seen what that is, and they can match that almost perfectly, not only with the presentation, but also with the colors. All of those keys are what will take those bigger fish that normally will just skate by something and go, I don't think so. Because they get big, because they're smarter than all the rest of the fish that are with them. Yeah. And that's why they're bigger than the rest of the fish. So when you can fool those bigger fish, it's to me the satisfaction of, my life goal is just to prove I'm smarter than a bluegill. And some days that goes well, some days not so much.
We know exactly.
I love the conversation that's going on in the comments right now, because we have people talking about, it can be really difficult to build confidence in a bait until you use it and you have a knockout day. That really reminds me, I was just telling Josh the other day, the day that I turned from live bait to plastics, I honestly, in open water especially, I love fishing with worms. Just that will get a bite. It's a piece of meat on a hook. And then I was out with Josh and one of our friends one day, and they were way out fishing me with plastics. And I think that is, I switched. I caught more fish like they were. And I think, that was that moment that built up my confidence that allowed me to, reach out into that world. And that was a really cool thing. But it's hard to do. And kind of on the other end, we also have somebody talking about, stepping out of your comfort zone is sometimes the only way to catch fish. So
sometimes people talk too, and another way to gain confidence in it is to maybe co-rig with it. So co-rig with a piece of plastic up front or behind and some live bait around it, because again, then you have that natural scent ball. I mean, we in Maki Plastic, like I put fish protein and amino, and our cover scent is an anise scent, right? So all of those things are things that trigger fish into holding a bait longer. It's not so much that it triggers them into eating it, but it holds it for a little bit longer. Our catch percentage, I think, is high, not because the bait tastes better, but because they will hold it a little bit longer. Number one, it's softer. Number two, it feels right in their mouth and it tastes right in their mouth. So they hold it and go, and then eventually it's going to come back out. I mean, fish are not going to eat plastic typically. I mean, they may ingest it all the way down, but for the most part, it's coming right back out of their mouth at some point. But how long they'll hold it is where your hook percentage goes significantly up. So you want to have that in their mouth as long as possible. The longest I've ever seen, I counted one time, and this was a trophy bluegill on a really good lake. I counted 43 seconds, and I never pulled on that fish. And I've got the video footage playing behind it, but he held it in his mouth for 43 seconds. Anybody who watches red ear sunfish, big bluegills, those trophy, what I consider to be sunfish family fish, sometimes it's a microsecond before that thing comes right back out of their mouth. So when you can get them to hold it for that long, you have a win that day, especially those bigger fish, those trophy fish.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you're talking about, or that you hinted at, as a bait maker, there's certain things that you can put in the plastic or even around the plastic. So, you were talking about the different scent and all of that, and certainly you can speak to that better than I can. But one of the things that I think a lot of people think is that the plastic just comes in a bag with some oil, but it is a lot more than that. So first of all, if you could kind of touch on, what that is and why we need it, but also as far as storing the bait, is it important to keep that oil on it? Do you store it in bags? Do you toss it in a Plano box?
Yeah. So there's two different types of plastic. There's elastisol, which is the real super stretchy stuff that kind of eats through your dashboard, and then there's plastisol. Both of them are oil-based products. Both of them will biodegrade in the lake at some point. Some take longer than others. But the softness and toughness, it's called a durometer. But that softness and toughness piece is what a company wants to weigh out. And then you want toughness for the fisherman for value, but then also enough softness that the fish will still hold it for a period of time so you can set the hook. So when you put stuff, there's two different ways to do it. Number one, there's a cover scent. On the outside of the bait, you put it in the bag. It's what you were talking about, Emily. When do you recoat that, right? When do you keep it in the bag, and how do you do that? But there's also impregnation, which is you actually build it into the bait itself, and that creates some of the softness and some of the taste on the actual inside of the bait. So we do both of those things. The outside really is more so, if I had a red man sign in here somewhere, if I was to put a chew in and the fish scented that very unnatural to them scent, tobacco, pizza, whatever it is, they would almost immediately eject it. So you want something that's going to cover that. But then also you want to trigger that this is food scent in their brain so that they go, yeah, I can hold this for a little while. So that's kind of the two ways that you do it, either impregnation and then also that. Now, the reason that I say to resend them, put them back in the bag, put them in a box, I use oil-proof containers. I didn't bring one. I don't have one here close enough to me. But I use oil-proof containers for mine, and I do keep it in the oil, and that's for two reasons. Number one, it does, obviously work as that everything that cover that I'm talking about. But two, it also forces me to re-rig it. So I will take a bait off before it gets so beat up that it's going to get tore off, and then it just goes into the lake and becomes a problem of waste. Or the fish itself will tear it off and eat it. So I re-rig about every 3 to 4 fish. Typically, I'll put a new bait on. Or if I just see that it's starting to get a little bit funky in the end of it, I will take it off and re-rig it too and put it back in the bag. So I know I'm going to come back to that bait at some point when the bag is, or the box is almost empty. But I will re-rig about every 3 to 4, just again to put that cover scent in the area, that feed scent, and kind of force myself to put it in a new hole so it just doesn't get ripped off and you lose that bait too soon, because baits are expensive.
That's a good point. A lot of people hook up their jigs with their plastics and put them back in their rod case, and then when they get to the lake or wherever, they'll take it back out and start fishing with it again. But that plastic's been sitting in your rod case in the back of your truck, or wherever, and it's really lost that scent, but also it's gained scent because being an oil-based product, it picks up scent really well.
Yep.
So that's a good tip to change out your plastics more often.
And also, sun is an enemy of plastics too. I mean, the sun will dry them out. I mean, I have some baits. I have baits here that are probably 10 or 15 years old that look exactly the same. But if I was to take that same one and put it out outside on a rock, by the end of the week, it would be pretty beat up. So, I mean, it's not quite as crazy as some of the other strictly unnatural baits that dry out like on your dashboard as you're watching them. But plastisol will dry out eventually, and it loses some of its action, some of the subtle actions that are in there by doing that.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I'm listening to my dog in the other room, so I apologize. I'm listening to you and that at the same time. I think one of the interesting things about plastic, though, is that there's endless possibility kind of behind the scenes. And so you're a perfect person to speak to behind the scenes. I mean, when there's a world of glitter and shimmer powder and colorants, and, I barely know the scratch of the surface of plastics. I've only poured a few times and it's a whole lot of fun. But I mean, I guess as far as somebody who is making them, what do you look for? Where do you start?
All of these goodies right here. Look at them. They're so beautiful. Well, I started with the natural world. So I start for me in our bait business. Typically Emily would draw me a picture. She said, "Hey, a perch spit this out of my hand. What is it?" And I do the research and I say it's, ABC. It's a North American bloodworm. And so I take a look at that. If I've not made that bait yet, then I would take a look at that bait and maybe can I make it as, naturally good looking as it would be. And then also can I make it maybe even more good looking? So I'll take bloodworms as an example. So bloodworms live in the dirt and the mud down below. And there's all kinds of flies that lay their eggs on the surface. They go down to the bottom. And so they start to hatch. And when they hatch, I'm going to do it with the camera. They kind of come up like this. No, I'll do it over here. They kind of come up like this and they go like this. Well, they have to clear their ventricles and then they suck back down into the bottom of the mud just for protection. So you want to present that bait so that it looks like those things just kind of crawling around down there, because that is exactly what's happening. When we're pounding the bottom of the bait, that's what we're doing in a basin bite. We're mucking up the bottom to look like whatever those aquatic insects are that are down there. So when you're building baits and when you're starting to design things, you want to look at the actual natural bait itself, whatever that is, and then come up with a way to mimic it and make it move similar to a way that actually moves. And then maybe you upsize it, or maybe you downsize it, or maybe you do both and you make 3 of them or 4 of them that are all in different shapes and sizes, because every aquatic insect lives through 3 or 4 life cycle changes. So, if I was to look at how I'm going to fish plastics, almost always first ice going to be bloodworms, because bloodworms are going to be the first food source. They're actually in there all summer long. They're such a great food nutrition for the fish. They're so programmed to eat them. I'm going to be on bloodworms first. Second is going to be a young bite, which, any fish that have laid their eggs and those eggs have hatched in that over the summertime. So that could be, anywhere from August to September. Those fish are going to be 3/4 of an inch to an inch, and you're going to find those in those bellies of especially crappies. They'll eat crappies that are up to 2 inches, in one bite, and they're out there eating their own young. So that year and young bite happens second. That's like that December, January. They chase them all the way through to when they're going to have to sit on nests, and then a shrimp bite comes up next, and some aquatic, those worms, as they change into more of a mid stage and they start to become more neutrally buoyant through that. So there's all of these life cycles that are occurring down below. And that's why plastics is so important. You can't possibly if you go to your best tackle store, how many baits do they have? They have minnows, maybe 2 or 3 different types of minnows. They have waxworms. They may have Eurolarva. They may have mealworms, and maybe some earthworms still from some place that they're getting them delivered in. But that's 5 that I counted right there, right? And there's, in just the rough numbers, there's 100,000 aquatic insects, 100,000 different aquatic insects. They live in 30 different families. In those 30 different families, then you can see all of the variations and life cycles that all those go through. Well, there's up to, and scientists, guys much smarter than me, but I read their work and then try to break it down for people who don't want to fall asleep reading a doctor's paper on, whatever name the bug. One of the things that they say is up to 70% of a fish's diet in the wintertime is coming off those aquatic insects. And I believe that to be true because they're easier to catch than almost anything else, and they're a nutritious food source. So as their metabolism slows down, they don't want to fight quite as hard to go get food. It's like, do you want to call up and have the pizza delivered? Or are you going to go get the pizza, right? If you're not feeling too good that day, you're going to have the pizza delivered. So that's kind of how the fish feel in the wintertime. Everything slows down and they want that delivery brought right to them. It's much easier for them to attack aquatic insects. There's many more, thousands of them available for them. So that's a huge food source for them during the wintertime. And I mean everything, huge predator fish, all the way to, tiny, the aquatic insects will eat themselves. Dragonfly nymphs will be down there eating bloodworms. So, everything, food, they're a food source for everything that swims in the water.
Yeah. Well, and this seems like a good time to bring up kind of a story of something that I actually learned from you. So as I kind of retell this version, let me know if my memory isn't serving me right. But we were at a show one year and you had a handful of plastics, and, they come in so many great colors, and it's really hard to not kind of ooh and ah over all of them. But I don't know if I had made a comment about what I like or don't like, but the point is I ended up saying that I never find myself using orange plastics. And you were very kind, but also responded with like, you're crazy. And here's why. You were talking about, especially at the end of ice season, when fish are looking for something like an easy meal, you do have occasions where something will maybe die and then, as it perishes, or something that was eaten and spit back up, but either way, that fish or that piece of meat that's floating in that system will kind of tend to gain a color that isn't, your blue or your gray or your green, your fishy colors that you tend to go to. It turns into kind of an orange shade. So whether that's more of a creamsicle or like that neon orange, depends on the water that you're fishing. But since you told me that, I found myself fishing with orange a lot. And I've been very successful, so that always makes me
That's interesting, yeah. And again, through the digestive process, the only reason I figured that out is if you look in the bottom of your live well, you're looking in your bucket at the end of the day, the fish are going to tell you. I mean, listening to an old guy like me means nothing. Listen to what the fish are telling you, right? Take a look at what they're doing. I mean, last week, literally, I took a perch. And if you pinch a perch right back here, most times, if you pinch them right back here, even if you're going to put them back in the water, and you just do that, everything will flop out into your hand. I mean, those types of hints from fish are so much more important than it's if you pay attention, and here's what you did that's so perfect, Emily. You paid attention to something, you bought into it enough that you said, I'm going to try this and see if it works for me. It's no different than the very first conversation that we had tonight. Okay, I'm going to try this plastic thing, and I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave all my live bait home for today. And even if I don't do so well, maybe I wasn't going to do well today anyways. Maybe it's a bad moon. Maybe it's whatever. We can blame it on whatever we want. But you failed to learn, or you've learned from it instead of failed to learn from it. You put it into your memory bank, and now it becomes part of your regular arsenal. That's what being a good fisherman is. That's why those, an old guy sitting on a bucket in the lake is better than anyone else on that lake, because he's not failed to learn the lessons from fish. He probably never read a magazine. He probably never, will write an article, but he learned from the fish what they want, and he knows that better than anybody else, and he's more successful in many cases because of
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I'd love to hear about from you is kind of, the outreach that you do with all the youth that you work with, because, you do quite a bit of that. And as I believe you might be a teacher and you might even get them involved in what you do. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's funny because Maki Plastic actually started like that. It started on the porch. We were at one of my buddy's cottages, and my buddy Tony brought out a bunch of whips, and they were just like the old style whips from some guy in Michigan made them. I can't remember what the guy's name is. And he said, what if we made these things in like the shape of actual bugs, right? So we originally started by, I'm like, I got to teach mold making. So I am a school teacher. I teach robotics engineering, automated manufacturing. I was in manufacturing for years before I went back to be a school teacher. So part of what I teach is mold making. So I was teaching mold making. Within a couple of weeks, I said, well, let me make one. So I called my kids over to the machine. I made a real simple mold, and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. I kind of like this. So we would just melt down Mr. Twisters, and we would squirt them into the thing and make a bait like that. And that's kind of how Maki Plastic started. So then it became this thing in my classroom that the kids years after years would say, hey, Brauer, can we make one of those fishing things? And then what if we go catch some fish? Can we get points for that? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We'll take pictures, send them back to me. Well, what if we bring them in and can we have a fish fry? We would make fish for us. So that's kind of how the whole thing got started. And then it, the bait started taking off because we had some success in tournaments and not me, but guys who fished for me and girls who fished for me, had some success with stuff that it just kind of blew up into this thing that's bigger than life and just became what it is today. That's the Maki story, kind of.
Well, and that's really cool. Sometimes that outreach, finding a population to even, there's people out there that want to get involved and help youth, but like, where do you start? And especially if you don't have a connection to people, it's really hard to make that. So, to be in a position where you have that opportunity is really cool. But also you have the opportunity to maybe even reach out to people who don't expect to like fishing. Maybe they're taking that class for a totally different reason. And then you never know at the end, what somebody comes to love. So that's really neat.
Yeah. And as as people, everybody grows through their life and they find different things that they're into or not into. And I've seen that exact scenario that you played out, kids that have never caught fish before, but they want to, right? Kids that have never hunted before, but they want to, but they just don't have a way to do it. It's easier now for them than it's ever been before. Like when I first started, even with Maki Plastic, the internet was just at the beginning. We had nothing but chat rooms, really. And in the chat rooms, we would go in. And that's kind of how Maki started was, the chat room was called Up North Outdoors. And, this is, goes way back into the mid 90s. But now, the kids are the ones because they've got so much information out there and they're so tech savvy and good at this. The kids are the ones that are now driving this industry and driving this business, because they're the ones that are sharing the information more freely and easier with each other, and so they start to get more followers. You look at like a Jack Johnson. Like that kid is going to be an absolute rock star, and already is in many cases, because he just is so natural at sharing with his peers, and there's a format for it. And so they know stuff that we didn't know. Would have taken us years and years to figure out any of that stuff. And they're just better at it than we are at sharing with each other. So now they have each other really to help with that too. And I think that's a huge benefit to the outdoor world. COVID, as many things as it did bad in our world, we've seen such an uptick in kids being outside hiking, biking, fishing, hunting. And again, when you trigger that in them, that could be a lifelong passion for them then. This bad disease that, took so many lives, it's awful, but it brought many families back together again also, and spending time in the outdoors. It's for that, I guess I'm thankful for.
And we hear that a lot from actually Minnesota right now. And, I hate to go and pick on them all the time, but, people out there have been kind of complaining, oh, there's so many people on the lakes. Oh, I can't get to my spot. But, I think what's so important is, go out and, maybe talk to those people, see what they're doing, see if they're catching fish, an old guy that knows about the lake. You can never really assume who's out there and who's not. And I just think to have something like fishing to be able to share together is really, really a cool thing.
It really is. And you know what, for every curmudgeon that's out there, there's 6 people that want to help somebody too, right? So there's guys like you, there's you guys, there's guys like me. We're going to drill holes for them. I'll jump out of my hole and go, hey, I want to show you what's going on right now. This is a travel corridor. This is how the fish are weaving through. pull up my phone and I'll look at the Google image of the lake and I'll say, see these dark lines? That's where we're standing right now. And here's why we're standing there right now. And you see this hole right here, this hole? Let's walk over to that right now. You can turn on your GPS. Let's walk over there right now. I'm going to zoom in on it. Take the time to help somebody really understand the biology. Take the time to help somebody love something to that extent in which they can do it themselves. I guarantee they become a teacher. Almost no one that you help understand something takes that information, shuts it down, and says, I'm not giving anybody this information because I want it all for me. It just doesn't happen. When you care enough to share, people will pass that on. That's what we as sports people all do for each other, no matter what age, young, old. You know, kids show me things all the time, and I'm supposed to be the teacher, right? If you'll just open up your heart and your mind, people will help you be a better person.
That's absolutely. So at the risk of being kind of random, opening up to the comments again, if anybody has any specific questions for Scott, he knows a whole lot of things. And certainly if I haven't thought of your question yet, like throw it up there. But we did get a few questions early on. So going back, you have a friend on here, Terry, says hi, and asking about your mentor, Joe Lowry.
Yes. So Joe, me, Joe, Dickey, and the guy who picked us up was Jimmy Lockery, and Terry grew up across the street. So hey, Terry, shout out, love you, brother. But yeah, it's just, it's the same thing. But back then we didn't have the internet to share with each other. So what happened? The Lockery station wagon showed up. The back door swung open, and every kid in the neighborhood jumped in, and we went fishing. That was the internet back then. That's too funny. That's too funny. Yeah.
Well, and so many of us have a story like that. I grew up with a single parent, a split household, and my mom used to drop me off at this little dam. It was at the base of a lake. It was a little concrete step dam, and I go out there and I fish bass. Well, I'm out there by myself. I'm 10, 12 years old or whatever, and there was an old guy that always fished there for a couple hours in the afternoon, and he always asked me what was biting. And he almost patterned me more than he patterned the fish, because I think, looking back on it, he liked having the company. Yeah. And he liked knowing if the fish were biting or not, if it was worth his time to sit there. But if I was there, it was always worth his time. And in retrospect, it was some of the most fun time I had, because I learned all kinds of stuff. And, just like some old fishermen do, I always, being a young kid, he'd throw me some tackle and stuff. And that's really, that's a cool story that I have. Very similar.
Wouldn't it be interesting to be able to have his perspective on that and why he fell in love with you? I would just love to have that connection. Wouldn't it be awesome?
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
I go back and look at that spot, and I'm like, man, how did I ever catch fish out of there?
I spent my summer, we used to call it the log pond. So we had, I grew up right near the Erie Canal, which runs all the way from Buffalo to Albany. And so there's this log pond that used to be where they shuttled logs in and out of when they used to ship logs down the canal. But it was where all the boats hung out. So I spent my summers there. Like, my dad had a really loud whistle, and he would call us home with that. But we would catch off the side of that cement embankment. We'd catch crayfish, and then we'd take the crayfish and catch fish from the log pond off the wall, off that same thing. But that could be honestly where my passion for trying to figure these little suckers out and catch a few more than everybody else. I just want to catch more fish than Danny Burns. That's another neighborhood kid I hope he's watching too.
I just try to catch more fish than Josh.
Exactly.
You usually have.
Oh my goodness. So, I guess for the end of the season coming up, do you guys still have ice?
We do. Yep. We're still fishing. We will be probably for another couple of weeks. I mean, I'm a little bit sad I can't get into Canada because there's some, I'm only 3 hours from a tremendous perch fishery up there, Lake Simcoe. And, that is what I consider 3 hours. I still consider to be one of my home lakes, because that's not that far to drive when you're nuts and you're an ice fisherman. It's not that far to drive. So, but we can't get into Canada right now, so they're enjoying all their fish. So all my people up in Canada, love you guys, miss you guys, and wish I was up there with you, but not going to happen this spring. So yeah, I think we're going to wind it up here like within the next couple of weeks. We talked a little bit earlier about the sun saturation, how that kind of attacks lakes. You know, we're sitting on 12 to 14 inches of ice for the most part. There'll be a little bit more water on it because we had a couple of rains this week and some warm weather, but the lakes will start to eat themselves pretty quick here shortly up in our area anyways. So I may have to drive a little further than 3 hours to get to it. I may have to go out to Vermont. I don't know. We'll see.
And then fair to say that you fish open water too? I
do. Not as much as I used to because the Maki world gets real busy. Like right now, I should be making bait. But the clam order with us is a big deal, and it takes all hands on deck. So I have a beautiful boat, sits by the side of my barn most of the year. I have a great kayak, sits there most of the year. We try to deliver everything, all of the winter baits by the beginning of August, so that I can have the month of August as a school teacher, get them off during the summertime. So we try to get everything out the door by August so that I can have a month to go fish and play with my grandkids on the pontoon and, have some fun in the sun too. So yeah, I love open water fishing. It's just, I don't get to do as much of it as I'd like to, but I do. I live right between Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. I mean, 45 minutes one way is trout and salmon and smallmouth bass, and the other way is perch and smallmouth bass and walleye till you are tired of pulling them in. So very fortunate destination where I live right here.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you what, I fish pretty much every weekend and I don't get to fish enough either. So that's a funny statement there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any hints at the next hot Maki plastic that's coming out?
I got a really nice bait that's going to be coming out. We typically will hold them back for a year or two just to make sure they're right. So, I would say Emily fished this bait for 6 months and give me your honest feedback on it. I don't have a pro staff like most people do. I don't want people just telling me the good news about stuff. I want them to tell me the truth about baits. So, my guys, my girls all give me genuine feedback on it. I've got some really good baits coming out for clam next year that we did a lot of really good work on and got them perfect before they hit the market. I mean, I'll cut a bait. I cut the molds. The thing most people don't, maybe they do realize probably at this point about Maki is I also, program and cut all the molds myself. I do all the prototype work and, I'll cut a mold 4 or 5 times before I think I've got a bait until it works right in this tank, until it works right in the hole, until the fish tell me that it's right. I will continue to play with that market until it's done. So we have some good baits coming out this next year that are pretty interesting bugs that I've had on my kind of radar. It's tough to come up with new baits. We got 36 aquatic insects, and so we have a very big product line already. But when something comes up that I don't have, that that a fish spits it into my hand that I haven't seen before, then I'll cut another mold and play with it until I think it will catch fish, and then let the fish tell me whether it's a good bait or not.
Scott Brauer secret stash, or they all go through the Maki plastic line?
You should actually just look through my bibs. Like if you get me, tip me upside down and shake me like you're looking for my lunch money, and see what baits fall out, because that's where all the prototype stuff is in my bib pockets usually.
We did also get a question that is like a perfect question that I didn't even think to bring up. A lot of people might not even know how to hook their plastic. So, you're talking about all these new things coming up. So even the things that are out, if it's a bug or if it's a minnow, do you do it the same?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that the camera will, will work okay. A vertical, I'm going to do a couple of simple things. So this is a drop kick. I don't know how well it'll show you. It'll show. So that's a typical drop kick. I'm going to take a Jamie, which is one of our baits. And so if it was the time in the period in which we were fishing, some baby bluegills, let's say they were eating baby bluegills, right? So instead of, most people when they put a piece of plastic on would perhaps put it like this, and it's just going to be out here and it's just going to be a wiggle bait. All they're doing is putting on a wiggle bait. But if you're trying to truly match the hatch, if I take that same bait and I then turn it sideways, and I, instead of having those whiskers go that way, and then I pull the legs apart a little bit, I can make it look like a tail and make it look very much like a baby bluegill just by turning the plastic sideways like that. So rigging is a huge thing. And the next thing, remember what I said was the next thing after that is going to be a shrimp bite. So that shrimp bite, same bait, same jig head. A shrimp, actually, look at the picture behind me. Those are weeds that are going to be dying here shortly. And the zooplankton and the microorganisms that live in there, that's what the shrimp eat. And the reason that, you can fish a weed bed 1 week and it's great, and the next week there's nothing on it, is not because the fish left for any other reason than their food left. So if the shrimp leave those weeds, the fish are going to follow those shrimp out into the basin, right? And the shrimp are following the shrimp out in the basin because their food left. Does that make sense? So the same bait, same thing. Everything is exactly the same, except for this time, I'm going to fold it right back on itself and then I'm going to put the string up on there, and now it looks like a scud. So now that same shrimp, same bait, now looks like a scud. So again, with plastics, what you can do differently than live bait is with the creativity of just thinking about what they're eating, looking at what they're eating in your hand, look at what they're spitting out, caught a fish the first time, take a look at what's in its belly. Then how do I best rig it using the jig head that I have to make it look like it? So get the color right, get the shape right, and then put it down there and shake it. In many cases, people only put plastic on going one way, and that is pointing right back out. That right there is one of my most deadly presentations all year long, because shrimp are always present in the water table. They're not always active. They don't always leave the weeds because they don't have to. Their food didn't. But when they're in the weeds, you fish a scud wrapped around like that, dropped right down by the side of it, it's money in your pocket, guaranteed 100%. So when you're rigging, no matter what it is, if it's a vertical jig, same thing. Just try to put the piece of plastic on there and make it look as much as you can like what they're naturally eating already down there. And then don't overpower a big fat jig head with a little piece of plastic, or a little piece of plastic with a great big fat jig head. I try to fish as light as I possibly can. One of the reasons that I like ice fishing so much is because you're right over top of the fish. We don't have to fight the wind and the waves. So we can really, truly get our presentation, our micro presentation down to the point where we really can learn from the fish what they like and what they don't like. In many cases, we can sight fish them either with a camera or looking down the hole and see how they're reacting to what we're doing up above. And if they don't like it, try something else. Sometimes it's 20, 30 times. Last week I was on a pretty good basin bite, and I was doing well Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Everything just kind of went bad, and it's just like that sometimes, right? On Thursday, it took me 23 changes to finally figure out what they would ingest. But I never gave up. I didn't quit. I was tenacious about it, and I knew they would eat. I just didn't know what it was. And then I finally started catching some fish. So stick with it, have confidence, play with the fish. Don't worry about bringing home a bucket of fish every day. Put fish back down in the hole and just learn from what they're going to teach you and have some fun. I like it when times are tough out there. I like it when fish don't want. And don't get me wrong, I like days when they're just trying to jump out of the hole at you. So you figure out what they're doing. So that's the part that on tough days makes you the fisherman that everybody else is trying to be. Right? Did I do a good job with rigging on that, Em?
That looked great.
And honestly, I was really impressed by that, because I expected, sometimes you see people that don't know how to use plastic and they do like the old nose hook, they call it, or, the way that you just like hang your little waxy on there. And, that kind of lends to kind of a lip plastic sometimes. There's a time and a place where maybe it does work or something. But even more than just threading that hook through the bait, the profile, flipping it the other way, having that tail curl over, as long as that fish can still bite it and have that hook accessible for the fishing purposes, I think that really has kind of opened my mind to even the way that I would use the plastics that are in my current box already. So I appreciate that you just expanded my current tackle collection.
Well, and back to something that you said earlier, is that plastics are expensive. And they're inherently expensive because you have to cut a mold for it. You have to buy the stuff to make it, and you have to sell it. And so the price is what it is. But when you can turn one plastic into 3 or 4 or 5, then you really extend that price point. And that's, that helps you catch more fish too.
And again, don't leave those little bits or pieces that come off of it laying on the ice. It makes me crazy when I see those things, because sometimes you just need a color splash up above. So if you need a red color splash for a perch, which perch primarily like some sort of a red color splash on something, and you're still fishing those waxworms, leave that red piece of plastic that is no longer a usable bait, but leave that up front on it just to give them something else to come in and take a look at. So don't underestimate just even that small piece that you ripped off because they were short biting it. They were just grabbing the tail. They wouldn't take it all the way in. So you kept breaking the bait back, and making it shorter and shorter till you started catching fish. But those small pieces, don't just throw those on the ice. Don't throw them in the lake. Put them back in the bag, rescent them, and then use them as a color change. Put a red, white, and blue one on and see how many American fish you can catch. Who's to say it's wrong? If it's catching fish, it's the right thing to do, right? So keep playing.
Well, and that's a really great point, because there's a number of times even this season, and I hadn't really done it before this year, but you have like a little bug plastic and you just tear off like the top 2 arms. You just don't want it quite as big, but you're left with that tiny chunk of plastic that has 2 little arms off the sides. And, like you're saying, you never know what stage of life that bug is in. And there are times where that's all they want is your garbage piece of plastic. That's what it is. So.
Yeah, there's micro and macro insects that are available out there, and there's millions of them, and that's why they eat those small things. I sell a mini Maki that is the tiniest thing. It has almost no movement to it at all. It's literally five legs, and it almost never moves. But it's my biggest bluegill that I've ever caught. 2 of my best bluegills that I've ever caught both came off that mini Maki on a small gold jig head, and it mimics that macro organisms that they're feeding on, those small crustaceans, those things. So yeah, sometimes smaller's good, and sometimes they want bigger stuff too. So just listen to the fish.
That's awesome.
They'll tell you what they want.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, and if the fish don't tell you, then that's why we have people online like you to go and watch your page. So, for the people who are watching at home, or for the people who want to continue, watching what you're doing as the season kind of comes to an end, or hear what's coming up next year, how do people get that information?
Yeah, so for me, Facebook is pretty much my gig. I mean, I did all the rest of them, and I don't have enough time, really, honestly, to do them correctly. Pretty much keep my Facebook page up to date, but it's also my ministry page. Like, you'll see a Sunday message, you'll see parts of my kids. So I don't have just a professional fishing page, because it's just you get the whole pack. You get the whole package with Brauer. That's right. So Facebook is the way to kind of follow me, probably the easiest way. Scott at Maki Plastic, if you have questions, or you don't have confidence, you didn't want to ask it here because you think it's a dumb question. As a school teacher, we tell people all the time there's no such thing as dumb questions, which, by the way, I've heard a few dumb questions, but I have a good straight face, so people never know if they're really dumb questions or not. But no, reach out to me, Scott at Maki Plastic, if you have something you're embarrassed to ask here, because there's really no bad questions. And if I don't have a good answer for it, I'll make something up, because I'm a fisherman. That's what we do.
And from my point of view, if you do ever get a chance to go to a show and see Scott there, I know at St. Paul he sits on top of the fancy tank and has his baits there, so you can see the action in the water. So that's a whole lot of fun. But definitely come and talk baits, or otherwise check it out on Facebook. So.
And I do have a YouTube page channel too, but it's not real active, and I try to share stuff out that way too. I do a lot of tips throughout the year and push them out that way. So hopefully, and if you want a tip shot, you say, hey, Scott, can you talk a little bit more about what you did? Use a little bit better camera. It's tough with these cameras to kind of see that stuff. So I'd be more than happy to try to help with that stuff too. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to be checking out your page. I think I do already once in a while, but I'll definitely keep tuned. And, thanks again for being here.
welcome. Thank you guys for having me on tonight. It was great. It was a lot of fun. It's good to catch up with you guys too. I haven't seen you in a year, so it was good to catch up with
you. Absolutely. Well, we'll talk to you later, Scott.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, you too.
All right, that was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, lots of info and lots of great conversation.
We spend a lot of time talking about gear and what we take on the ice and how we do it. But ultimately, what is at that very end of your line is part of what determines if you're going to catch fish or not. So, it was a whole lot of fun to talk shop and talk plastics.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest takeaways, just help people. When you're out there, help them. And you'll find that you'll get that help back.
Yeah. Awesome. And if you do have any other events coming up in the end of ice season or anything coming up for open water, let us know. We'd love to hear about that. Otherwise, we're hoping to see you on next week's edition of the Night Bite.
Later, guys.